amazing, the one, the only, Evan Slaughter, a.k.a. Fit2Serve. Fit2Serve1 on Instagram.
We got a special guest for you guys today, Evan Slaughter, Fit2Serve.
Dude, perfect day to come out here and play some pickleball, man. I just got tired of being tired, if you want to know the truth about it. The CrossFit Games are just around the corner. So for me, this is whenever I really turn up the training.
Who are you, sir? That's a tough one to start with. So you just, an introduction? Okay, all right. My name's Evan Slaughter, and I make comedy videos on social media. So I was born in Montgomery, Alabama, kind of a little bit southern part of Alabama. Shortly after that, we moved to Birmingham. My dad was actually working on a cattle farm at the time. And my mom got pregnant with both me and my brother, kind of unexpectedly. My brother's about 18 months older, and so my dad decided we needed to move to Birmingham, a little bit bigger city. He went back to school so that he could make enough money to take care of his family. So growing up, I was the younger one, definitely the baby of the family. Just a typical middle class, you know, family. Played sports kind of growing up. Lived in an apartment starting out when we were younger, and then as we got a little bit older, my dad ended up moving us to the suburbs of Hoover in Alabama, and started going to school there in the Hoover City School District. So after, you know, high school, I did go to college. I went to a small school in Nashville, Tennessee called Lipscomb University. And, but it was kind of the same thing there, you know. I was not plugged into school, not taking it seriously, enjoyed partying and hanging out. And so I ended up moving back to Birmingham after that, and I was very interested in fitness. I wanted to do some kind of personal training, and a friend of mine ended up opening a gym in Hoover, and he hired me, and I actually started managing the gym and working as a personal trainer, and I did that for a little while, but that's right when I first started struggling with opiates. Opiates were a big struggle for me. My dad had addiction issues throughout our life. He's now sober, but when I was about 15 or 16, he actually left our family. He went to Central America, just randomly sold some of the stock he had in his company and took off to Central America. And we found out he had a bad cocaine problem. And he ended up coming back to Birmingham and ended up getting some help, going to rehab, and he's since then remarried my mom. They had gotten divorced through all this. They've remarried now. He's back in our family and a great dad and a great grandfather, and so it was really cool to see that. But I started going through my own struggles, and so I remember the first time I started doing opiates and how I was immediately hooked. It was one of those things that for me, and I had done other stuff through high school and college, but this was different. It was something that I remember doing the first time and thinking I was going to do it the rest of my life. I think I was 22 whenever I first started, 21, 22 when I first started with opiates, and it started with Oxycontin, and it kind of started out as a recreational thing, doing it with friends, and quickly became something that I was doing every day. So I remember, you know, I decided that I was going to go to my dad and tell him that I needed help. And I was 21 or 22 at that time. But knowing what he had gone through, I felt pretty comfortable about going to him with this. And they immediately were able to get me into a nice treatment facility. It was a 30-day program. And it was really, really cool because when I got there, I was put in the 30-day program house, which happened to be the same house that they would house the active duty military men who were struggling with substance abuse and would get sent to this place by the military. And so I was in the house with a lot of active duty military guys. I knew nothing about the military at the time, but after spending 30 days with them and getting to know them and hearing their story, when I came out of that program, I decided I wanted to join the Army. And so I started that process. I knew nothing about it. I literally actually wanted to try to join the Marine Corps first, and went to a Marine recruiter's office, Walked in, had no idea what to expect. I thought it was one of those things that I sign up and we leave later that day for boot camp, and I found out that is not the process. There was actually a 9-month period before you could go to boot camp, and this was 2010. You know, we were at war with Iraq and moving into Afghanistan, so I just figured it would be a pretty easy process, but it was more difficult than I thought. So I ended up going to the Army recruiter, and it was a 3-month turnaround. So I knew I wanted to be infantry. You know, I took the test, did well on the ASVAB, had a couple years of college, so that was a good thing going into the military. And but I knew I wanted to be infantry. I wasn't even interested in the other jobs. So I signed up, joined as an infantryman, and 3 months later I was on my way to basic training in Georgia. I went to basic training at what was Fort Benning, Georgia at the time. It has now been renamed as Fort Moore, home of the infantry. They have airborne school there. And I did well. I enjoyed being in the military environment. I enjoyed the structure. I was in really good shape at the time. I think I was still 22, maybe 22, 23. And I did well enough that there was an opportunity for me to go to airborne school after I graduated from infantry school. And then after that, I actually went to Special Forces selection and was one of the top 3 PT scores in my class and was able to get the opportunity because of that. And I went up to Fort Bragg after finishing airborne school, and I went through SOPSI, which is Special Operations Preparation and Conditioning course. I passed that. Ended up going to selection shortly after that and failed the last ruck event in selection by just a few minutes, and so was unable to finish the selection process. But because I had made it as far as I had, I was given an opportunity to go to a LRS unit, which stands for Long Range Surveillance. It was in Fort Hood, Texas. Got orders to go there, and as soon as we got there, I got orders that we were deploying to Afghanistan for 12 months. I was still young and just of that mindset that nothing could happen to me. What was cool was going with guys that had been deployed before, some of the best leaders I've ever worked with in my life. But I didn't know what to expect until about a month or so in 2011. I ended up hitting an IED, an improvised explosive device. There were actually 2 IEDs that went off, and the first IED hit the first truck of the first convoy in front of us and actually killed one of the guys in our unit. And we came up behind to pull security and hit a secondary IED, and I was the gunner in the lead truck of that second convoy that hit the IED. And I can remember thinking, like, when we first found out we had a KIA, killed in action, hearing that come over the radio is when it really became real for me. You know, I started to take things more seriously and understand that, hey, I may not come home from this. And then after hitting the IED, fortunately, I wasn't devastatingly injured. I did dislocate a tendon in my ankle, had some other bumps and bruises, was given the chance to actually leave deployment, go to Germany where they would look at my ankle, determine if it needed to have surgery, and then from there I would have been sent back home, and actually turned down that opportunity. And I decided just to let my ankle heal while we were there in Afghanistan. I wore like a medical boot with my uniform and was moved to a driver for a long time, but by the end of the deployment, I was back dismounting and moving and running again, and ultimately glad that I stayed the whole year there with my team and was able to finish the full deployment and head back to Fort Hood after that. So whenever we got back to Fort Hood, because I was injured in Afghanistan, the first thing they did was put me on pain medication again. And so at the time I was thinking, because it had been a while, several years since I was, had gone through the issue the first time, and now in my mind I had a legitimate excuse to start taking the pain medication again. I allowed myself to start taking it, and it of course went right back to me being addicted to opiates again. Shortly after that, I ended up getting out of the military and heading back to Birmingham. And whenever I did, I was basically leaving the Army, badly addicted to opiates and still struggling from, I guess it would be defined as PTSD issues, but mainly just some serious anxiety from just the whole deployment thing, you know, and not having properly dealt with that. So I was going back to Birmingham, where I was from, badly addicted to opiates, not healthy in my mind by any means. I kind of felt like I had cheated death and I was just living on borrowed time was the mindset I had. And that caused a lot of problems for me when I got back to Alabama. So having received a Purple Heart overseas, a combat infantry badge, I was battlefield promoted. I was the only battlefield promotion during that deployment for our unit. I just had this mindset that it was kind of a cocky, egotistical mindset. You know, I was still in my mid-20s by this point. Felt like I had done enough in life, and I took that attitude with me whenever I got out of the Army. As soon as I got back to Alabama, things just got worse for me. I was, like I mentioned, badly on opiates. I was also taking some stuff for PTSD, you know, Valium, different benzodiazepam type medication, which is, in my opinion, not great for you either, especially when you're taking opiates with it. And so I just, you know, I was like living in a life that felt like it wasn't reality. I felt like I was just going through life, couldn't get in trouble, nothing could happen to me, still had that bulletproof mindset. And it actually led me to getting arrested in 2015. I had the genius idea, because I would run out of my medication early, that I would prescribe myself some medication over the phone. So I stole a DEA number off a prescription bottle and called in myself some Class 1 narcotics, and it did not work. Immediately the plan was foiled. You know, the pharmacy actually, they set up a little sting operation and actually called me and told me my medication was ready, come on and get it. And I go down there thinking it worked, and it did not. So as soon as I paid for the medication, I was arrested. And I was arrested and charged with unlawful possession of a controlled substance. And I was actually arrested in a county in Alabama that was the first county to start the Veterans Court program. And so I was very fortunate in this aspect. I think in the long run it ended up saving my life, because going through that court program, it was very strict. I had to take drug tests. I had to report to court every 2 weeks, and I struggled with that. Even knowing that they were going to lock me up every time I failed a drug test for at least 2 weeks at a time, I still managed to abuse opiates. And so that really taught me how powerful that the addiction is. I was able to stay sober long enough to finish the court program, and graduated from the court program, had the felony dropped off my record because of, you know, finishing the program. But that wasn't where it ended for me with opiates. So at this point in life, it was just, I wasn't working at the time. I had, you know, was getting VA disability, just very lost, no direction. My physical fitness was suffering for sure, but my mental health was the main thing that was suffering. I did end up getting a good job working in multifamily real estate through a friend, and I did that for a little while. And then ended up going back to opiates. And it was like, I would stay sober for a little bit and then go back to it, and stay sober for a little bit and go back to it. Ended up changing jobs and became an operations manager for a fairly large plumbing company in Alabama, another good job. But I was miserable. I was not happy. It was an office setting, and I just did not do well in the office setting. You know, I needed more. I came from, you know, infantry, long-range surveillance unit, being deployed in Afghanistan, being injured in combat, all this stuff, to kind of just a little bit more dull, mundane life. And I needed that chaos. It's like I thrived off that chaos. And so, but I was able to hold down a job for several years, and while going back and forth, struggling to stay off opiates completely. And I ended up getting married at the time, and it didn't work out. It didn't work out because I was dishonest, and I just was not the person that I knew I truly was. I was still struggling to get off the opiate thing. So I've got all this going on, and I just was super depressed. You know, mental health was the worst it's ever been. I was unhappy with the job. I was still addicted to these opiates, going back and forth with that, and just generally unhappy in life. You know, finally, after living that way for a long time, you know, one thing that I've learned to give myself credit for is that I'm someone who doesn't quit. You know, I won't quit. I'll continue to fight and fight and fight for what I believe in and for a better way of life. And I wanted that for myself. I just didn't know what that looked like. And so after going through all this, you know, the divorce, I was definitely at the bottom, what I consider a bottom in my life, you know, the lowest that things have been for me. Unhappy, alone, you know, was ruining relationships with friends, family. And then finally one day I had a couple really good friends, still good friends to this day, that cared enough about me to come to my house and say, hey, what's going on? You need to do something about this. And they were able to get me into a treatment program in Alabama that was a 3-month program. And because I was so broken, I remember just breaking down on the porch and saying, hey, you know, they came over because I was a big liar. That was my thing. I lied because I thought that by manipulating the truth, it would better the outcome for me. And I learned that it was only making things worse. And at this point, when they showed up at my door, I was so broken and so ready for change that I couldn't lie about it anymore. And they said, Evan, what are you doing? You need help. And I said, you're right, but I don't know what to do. And that was the first time I felt some relief in a long time. So they were able to get me into this 3-month program, and I get to the 3-month program and go through some of the worst withdrawals I've ever, you know, experienced in my life. But after that, on the other side of that, I remember just taking it one day at a time, building it back up. You know, there at the place, they had a little gym, and they also had pickleball, which is where I first started learning pickleball. And I was enjoying life again, and I was starting to work on my physical health so slowly. I remember I was a big bench press person. I could barely bench press the bar, basically. I was so physically weak, and by the time leaving the treatment program, I'd gotten my strength up to where I was benching like 290 again. It was a drastic change, and I remember that feeling. I felt like myself again. I cleaned up and did the 3-month treatment program, and I remember getting out. I was at a place in my life where I decided that I was going to stop caring what other people thought about me. I was always so consumed with how I was perceived or what other people thought, and I'd seen the road that they had taken me down. It basically killed me, or tried to kill me, you know. I was tired of it. I was sick of it. And so I was just happy to be alive and be sober and be experiencing life again. And I came out of that treatment program and decided to sell the home that I owned at the time and move back in with my parents for a little while, which was kind of hard to do, being an adult and having to do that. But it was one of those things that humbled me and allowed me to build a relationship with them again that I'm super grateful for today. And I decided that I wasn't going to do things that I was miserable in anymore. You know, I just wasn't going to live life that way. I was going to go after things that excited me and made me happy, and also things that I feel like I was meant to do, you know, some purpose in my life. And it came back to comedy for me. I remember laughing again for the first time in this men's treatment center, and how good that felt. And then being someone who can make people laugh, and being myself again, and bringing humor to the atmosphere, and everybody loving, you know, the energy that I would bring, and just liked having me around again. And I was like, you know, this is what I need to do. The joy that I feel like comedy brings to other people is what keeps me going. When I get messages from people now that say how much my comedy videos have helped them, it blows my mind. But it reminds me that I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So whenever I left, that was the mindset I took. And since I had sold the house that I owned, I was able to pay off any debt I had and had some money in the bank where I could pursue making comedy videos online and not have to worry about going to get a job at the time. So that I was really blessed in that sense. But I started making some stuff on TikTok, and it took off for me and started doing well. And I remember the first video that I would, you know, I had a viral video, and that feeling of, okay, these people, they can relate to this. They're laughing at this, and they're having fun with it, and people like it. And that just kept me going and going. And then finally, you know, I was posting on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook at the time, and throwing some stuff on YouTube, and then Instagram started to do really well for me. And it was from that, you know, moment, I was doing basically pickleball comedy, because I was doing comedy around things that I was involved in at the time. Pickleball comedy was a big one because I was playing pickleball. And then I'd kind of gotten out of shape. So I'd gotten in shape at the 3-month rehab thing. And then when I got out, I worked out for a little while, but started just to slowly get in the worst physical shape of my life. And I wanted to be healthy again. So I was doing things around fitness and making these comedy videos around fitness. But one thing that I like to think about and point out is even though that I was the worst I've ever been physically in my health, I was the best I'd ever been with my mental health. And that spoke to me because I fixed what was going on upstairs, and that has led to changes in my life today, especially, you know, with a desire to have better physical health. But so the comedy stuff started taking off, and I said, you know what, as long as I continue to be able to have success at this and do it, I'm gonna do this. And that was over 2 years ago, and I haven't looked back since. A lot of people ask me like where the Fit2Serve name came from, and it actually, it was my Instagram handle way back, and I was trying to do this workout group whenever I first got out of the military and had kind of gotten sober after the arrest situation, where I would, you know, get people to, you know, some friends and family or whoever wanted to come. We would meet at the park and we would work out together, and we would just talk about positive things. And that's where I came up with the name, because I decided that we're all fit to serve in some capacity. But whenever I came up with the name originally, I was sort of referring to how we needed to be physically fit in order to go out and serve other people. But that's not what it means for me today. You know, that concept changed because I learned that when I was in the worst physical shape of my life, I was serving more people through this comedy thing. So fit to serve means that I believe that we're all in some way fit to serve other people, and you can call that purpose, you can call that whatever. But so the example I like to use a lot is like people that like being, you know, having a career as a school teacher, you know, the ones that really love it or into it and love being educators. Like that's a purpose, that's their way. They're equipped to serve in that way, whereas there's no way I feel like I could do that. If you put me in a school and I'm teaching a bunch of kids, I would lose my patience so quickly. But there are people who love it. For me, that's what comedy looks like. I believe that through comedy, I'm using that in a way to serve other people, and the way that I'm doing that is by sharing my story, not being ashamed of how I look whenever I'm getting back in shape, and all those other things. You know, finally, after a year and a half or so of being in the worst shape of my life, through me getting healthy mentally again, I started to have a desire to want to improve my physical health. And the reason that came was because I was starting to experience life and really enjoy life. And I found that from being in better physical shape, I could go and do more things that I want to do. You know, I tried surfing one time, and I struggled at it because I was very out of shape, but it's something I've always wanted to do. And I was like, you know what, that's a reason right there to get in better shape, so I can not limit myself on experiences that I have in life. And so I've found that like learning to love myself again has led to a desire to learn to take care of myself better physically. And for me, that's a more lasting way to approach physical health. Whereas in the past, I used to look at it, I want to be physically fit so people like me, so they look at me a certain way, so they think I'm attractive, so they blah, 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 blah. And that was not a lasting reason for me to be physically fit. I could be in the best shape of my life physically and be in the worst shape of my life mentally, which I've been there before, and it's miserable. What's the point of even being physically fit if you're not happy upstairs, or you're depressed, or you're isolating, or you're doing all these, you know, unhealthy traits? So being able to get my mental health fixed and work on that and let that leading to a desire to improve other areas of my life is where I've really found success. Whenever I think about what inspires me, a lot of times right now in my life, it's just being able to help other people. You know, having grown a decent sized social media audience, I feel like there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And that's inspiration alone. Like just knowing that people actually have better days after watching the comedy videos, or have, you know, have more confidence going to the gym, or they want to make health changes in their life. That for me is a big inspiration each day. You know, whenever I was at the darkest days that I've experienced in life so far, and hopefully it's the darkest I'll ever experience, I still felt like there was a glimmer of hope. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what, you know, what that felt like. I just knew that this couldn't be it for me. And I think that goes back to just choosing to not ever give up. And that's one of the biggest things that, you know, you hear of all these people struggling with opiates that end up ODing or taking their own life, or whatever, depression, taking their own life, whatever it is. And so the biggest thing that I think that I want to convey to other people is like, just don't give up, you know, keep fighting and learn to get honest and admit whenever you need help, and let that be the stepping stone to changing your life.